Okay, here we are once again. This is lesson number 2, part 2. And we left off with Pharaoh dismissing Moses and saying, never return here again, or the next time you see me, you will be killed. And Moses replied, it will be as you said, I will never appear before you again. All right, we're to the what plague, kids? The 10th. Yes, the 10th and the final plague. Let's open up our last bag and find out what was that last plague. Well, this is, maybe some of you know what this is. This is like kind of like a casket for someone that has died. This is the kind that a pharaoh or the son of a pharaoh would be placed in after their death. And so the 10th plague we see is the plague of the death of the firstborn son. Now the Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. This will be the plague of the death of the firstborn son. On the 14th day of this month, I will send the angel of death over the land of Egypt and the land of Goshen. At midnight, all firstborn sons will die. Now, kids, how many of you boys out there are firstborn sons? That means you are the first son of your family. My husband is a firstborn son, and I only have one son that is a firstborn son. So you can see that in a family, if there are boys, there's a firstborn son, and this plague would have affected the firstborn men and boys of their families. And remember, it wasn't just going to happen in the land of Egypt, but now it's also going to happen in the land of Goshen. So, does God want to kill the firstborn sons of the people of Goshen, the Israelites, his people? No. God had a plan to protect all the firstborn sons of the Israelites on this night. But God's people would have to obey the Lord. This was really important. Let's find out what God said. The Lord said to Moses and to Aaron, tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. The animals that you choose must be 1-year-old males without any defects. They couldn't have any problems with them. They had to be healthy. And you may take them from the sheep or the goats, and you take them into your homes on the 10th day, and you care for them. And then on the 14th day of the month, when all the people of the community of Israel must then kill their animal. They must slaughter their animal at twilight. Now, how many days were the animals going to be in their home? That's right, 4 days, from the 10th to the 14th. I bet it was kind of hard to kill that animal after you've had it in your home for 4 days. But they obeyed. And then they were to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and the tops of the door frames of their houses. That same night, they were to take the meat from the lamb that they had killed, and they were to roast it over the fire along with bitter herbs and bread that was made with no yeast. They would have no time for that bread to rise up and be fluffy. They would need to eat a bread that was more like a cracker. And this is how you were to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt. In other words, have your travel clothes on, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. And that's how the people prepared themselves. God said, on the same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men of the men and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. God had a plan for this death to pass over all the firstborn boys and men of the Israelites. All they had to do was obey God. Do you think they obeyed God? They did. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go at once, select the animals for your families, and slaughter the Passover lamb at the right time." And they obeyed the Lord God. And they took that bunch of hyssop on the right day, the 14th day. They dipped it into the blood in the basin, and they put some on the top and the sides of their doorposts and door frames. And the Lord passed over the houses of those who had the blood of the lamb on their doors. They passed over the Israelites, and they were saved. But at midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up in the night, and there was a loud wailing and crying in Egypt as they found their loved ones, their men and their boys, had died. It says that not a house of Egypt didn't have someone in it that was dead. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites," because Pharaoh's own son had died. "Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go and also bless me." The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, "we will all die." Now remember, God had made a promise to Moses and said, "When I finally have freed the Israelites from Egypt, as they leave, they're supposed to ask the Egyptians for some things, right? Silver and gold and clothing." The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and all that clothing. And the Lord made the Egyptians favorable to them and wanted to give up these items to the Israelites just so they would leave their country. And so they gave them all that they asked for. And God led his people out of Egypt, and he led them out into the desert on a road toward the Red Sea. It was God who led his people. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud. The cloud would guide them on their way. And by night, a pillar of fire to give them light so they could travel by day or night. When the king of Egypt was told the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go, and we've lost all of our slaves." So Pharaoh had his chariots made ready, and he took his army with him. It says in the Bible they had 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, so that he went to pursue the Israelites, and they marched boldly after them. And as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there they could see the Egyptians were coming, marching after them. What do you think they did? Do you think they just said, "Hey, it's okay, God's going to take care of us. He did before, right?" Well, you would hope that's what they would have said, but it wasn't. They were afraid. They were terrified and cried out, "What have you done to us to bring us out of Egypt? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die here in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm. You will see the deliverance the Lord will bring for you today. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still. Then the Lord said to Moses, raise up that staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and the sea will be divided so that the waters will open, and the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. The Egyptians will know I am the Lord. Wow, huge miracle. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned the land into dry ground. And the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on that dry ground. They had a wall of water on their right and a wall of water on their left. But the Egyptians pursued them, and all of Pharaoh's horses and chariot and horsemen followed them into the sea. And the Lord threw the Egyptian army into confusion. They didn't know what was happening. He made the wheels of their chariots come off so that they had difficulty driving their horses. And the Egyptians said, let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord, he is fighting against Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back into its place, and the Lord swept them into the sea. And the water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. That day, the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians lying there dead on the shore. And when the Egyptians saw the great power of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, they feared the Lord God, and they put their trust in him, and they trusted in Moses, the servant of God. And this is where we're going to end part 2 of lesson 2, because now in the next following lesson, lesson number 3, we'll find out what God does as he continues to lead his people towards the land of Canaan, that promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. But you'll have to wait for that lesson. Thank you for joining me.